I'm Ferreira, work at the III. Great pleasure indeed to be sharing today's seminar on job insecurity, savings and consumption, an pilot experiment by Conchita. Conchita is a professor of economics at the University of Luxembourg. She's been there since 2013. She's also still the editor of the Review of Human Wealth, which she's been doing for a very long time and extremely well. Hardworking editor and member of the profession. She's been one of the most important people contributing to our field in inequality and so on in Europe, in the world. So great to have you, Conchita. Over to you.
Well, now there's a lot of pressure after these wonderful words that Chico said about me. I hope I deserve that, and I hope I won't disappoint everybody with my presentation. It's very, very nice to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I think this is my first seminar after 2019, since 2019. So you can imagine, I just gave another talk a few weeks ago in Bordeaux, but I've been in lockdown for a long time. So it's nice to be here and to meeting people in person and try to explain what we're doing. And as often happens, we have a new title. And I'm going to present a joint paper with Andrew Clark, who is in the room, and Anthony Lepanter, who is with us in Luxembourg. And this paper is part of a long-run research program on economic insecurity that we have been conducting. And economic insecurity has emerged as a major research topic in a number of social sciences, so it's not only in economics. And it appears increasingly frequent in policy debates, so it's not rare that you turn on the news and you hear people talking about economic insecurity, people in the street, the policymakers, journalists, they all say that we are feeling much more economic insecure than we were in the past. And there are good reasons for that. Okay, we have that household optimism scores have all dropped sharply in the recent decades. And it's really unforgettable what we're just coming out from, the COVID-19 pandemic. So there has been a lot of shocks that have fueled pessimism and had negative consequences of individual well-being. Before the Great Recession, then we went through the refugee crisis, the COVID-19 pandemic, and then the conflict in Ukraine. And we really all feel, I believe, that economic instability is affecting our lives. We feel economically insecure, a sentiment that is also exacerbated by the standardization of our life course. We live away from our family, we have fewer kids, it's more common to get a divorce, our friends are away, so we are living a different life as well. And what is economic insecurity? We're still debating in the literature about different definitions. And this up here is a few verbal descriptions that you can find in the literature. The first is from the famous Stiglitz report. Okay, economic insecurity is stresses arising from uncertainty about the material conditions that may prevail in the future. According to Lars Osberg, economic insecurity is the anxiety produced by the lack of economic safety. So for Lars, you're insecure if the welfare state doesn't protect you well enough. So they have sort of an aggregate measure of insecurity. And in an earlier work with my co-author Walter Bossert, we had this individual level definition of economic insecurity. So it's the anxiety produced by the possible exposure to adverse economic events and by the anticipation of the difficulty to recover from them. So our idea of economic insecurity is that you're here today, you look at the future and you worry that you feel anxious because you may be hit by an economic shock tomorrow and you're not able to recover. Okay, so it has to do with the anxiety, with economic worries about something that may happen to you in the future. And we have contributed to research on the topic by proposing and characterizing axiomatically some indices of economic insecurity that are based on the past stream of resources, with the idea that you worry less today if you were able to make it more in the past. And also we have been trying to explore the consequences of being insecure on individual well-being and behavior. So let me guide you through some of our findings. This is a paper where we explore the relationship between economic insecurity and political preferences. We characterize in this paper a measure of economic insecurity with this description that I gave you in the past wealth, ups and downs in the past, and the more you were able to go back up, the more confident you are that you're going to do the same tomorrow, so you worry less. And we show that with this measure of economic insecurity that we have in mind, individuals that feel economic insecure, they vote right-wing. In Germany, the UK, and the US, we look at long-run panel data sets. And we also show, using UK HLS, that they support Brexit. Using the same index, we see that those that are economic insecure, they have also worse health outcome, both in terms of physical and mental health. But this is not the only way to look at economic insecurity. You can use actually, you can go around and see if there were some natural experiments, the way we like to call them, that increase economic insecurity of a group of workers. And what happens that there were some reforms, and I'm going to mention two of them, and our paper is on one of them in particular, that made it either easier to lay off one group of workers. So they made this group of workers more insecure as compared to the other group of workers, or they made it more difficult to lay off one group of workers, and they made the other group of workers more insecure. So where we had looked at the labor market reforms that took place in France, the famous De Lalande reform. And what the De Lalande reform did, it made more difficult to lay off older workers in larger firms. And that this had an implication on those that were younger. In particular, we show in these two papers that those that are more insecure because of the reform, they have fewer children, so economic insecurity reduces fertility. And this is a paper by Andrew and Anthony. And also we show that it has some implications in terms of marriage. And in particular, we show that economically insecure women that are cohabiting, they decide to get married. And they also, especially those women that are mothers, that are more risk averse if something may happen to them tomorrow. So what the paper is, this is about today now, we're going to look at the effect of economic insecurity on savings and portfolio choices. And we're very lucky to have had a reform that affect insecurity of workers. And there is a data set that is very rich in terms of savings decisions and also where the savings is going. And what do we expect to find, which is what we find, that those that are more insecure, they save more, if they can save more. And the increase in savings goes into safer assets as opposed to risky assets. So what we are going to look at, we look at Italy. In particular, we look at the Fornero law, the Fornero reforms that took place in Italy in the middle of 2012 with the Monti government in Italy. And we're going to use the Bank of Italy data, the survey of household income and wealth, that is incredibly rich in terms of savings and portfolio choices. And what do we find? We find that workers that are more insecure, they save more. Because we do not observe any changes in household income, this means that the increase in savings is accompanied by a reduction in consumption. but not all consumption, non-food expenditure, because food stays constant. You cannot really choose to consume less on that. And we see that this does not affect everybody. In particular, it doesn't have an effect on those that cannot save more. So those that are financially constrained, they don't react to the reform. And we also see that there is a shift.
Could I ask, I mean, is that consumption thing an observation or is it an assumption?
An observation. In the Bank of Italy data, I'm going to show you that there is the coefficient on consumption is on income is.
I mean, people could switch, let's say, from eating out to eating the phone, this kind of thing. For example.
Yes, I see that. I'm not sure we check if there are switches from eat at home.
Do you have data on the returns to saving? You're saying that the more insecure individuals invest in safer assets. Are you going to be able to assess that whether that generates an income loss because of lower returns to the safer assets?
We haven't checked if lower returns. I think we could. And then see, because you are asked today about your savings, and we are looking at a cross section, so we really do not know the return tomorrow. In the Bank of Italy data, there is a small panel component, so we could look what happens to the next wave returns to the savings. We haven't.
Sorry.
Yes, please.
Just to clarify, the Fornero reform, is that to make it easier to?
I'm going to explain that.
Okay, good.
I'm going to discuss what she did. Other please.
By assets, you mean also property or?
No, it's capital investment, and I'm going to show what we mean by safe, like postal PO. You know, say if you buy a bond, if you invest, if you keep a saving deposit in a bank, at the post office, this is savings. This is safe assets, and then everything else, basically, if you buy a stock or other type of more risk investment, we define as risky. Anything else? Okay. Anyway, this is it. So I'm just going to show you. I'm just going to show you the numbers, but this is the paper, and this is these are the findings, which are, I think, not surprising at all. Okay. So it's nice if you ask.
So if we are not going to see an estimation equation, then I can ask.
No, you will see an estimation equation, but it's a standard definitive equation with a few controls, but it's really very, very basic. Okay, so going back to your question, what was before the Italian labor market? What were the rules for unfair dismissal? So until the Monti government, when Elsa Fornero was the Minister of Labor, they tried to increase flexibility of the Italian labor market. And the reason was mainly that they wanted to reduce the high unemployment rate, trying to make the Italian labor market more flexible. And before that first reform, workers could be laid off only for two reasons, just cause or justified reasons. But it took ages to have a court verdict about this dismissal. And the consequences, so I shift to the next slide. The consequences, if the judge decided that dismissal was unlawful, depended on firm size. So for smaller firms, it was the employer who could choose between restatement or compensation, restatement without foregone wages or compensation ranging from 2.5 to 14 months. For larger firms, that means firms with more than 15 employees, it was the employee, the worker, who could choose between restatement And then all foregone wages were given to him or her, or compensation. Okay. But in practice, it took ages to have this verdict. Okay, Ichino and co-authors, they show that the average length of a trial was 71 months. I mean, Italy is known to have trials that never end. And because there was absence of a clear definition of what unlawful was, the trial verdict was very uncertain. It depended on the judge. And the employees, very often, they chose restatement when they could choose. So the layoff costs were different between workers in working in smaller firms as opposed to workers working in larger firms, because those that were workers in larger firms, the layoff costs were larger. Okay. Then the Monti government, the Fornero reform with the Legge Fornero. And what do? They didn't change anything for small firms, but for larger firms, they sort of increased the insecurity of these workers. They made it easier for them to be laid off because they gave less power to the employees. So it was the judge deciding now between restatement and compensation. And the restatement was limited only to a subset of unlawful dismissals. And it was also less costly for the employee because, for the employers, because compensation were capped. So it was not everything that was due from dismissal, but there was a cap between 12 and 24 months. And they also provided a more clear definition on what was unlawful dismissal, making the trial verdict less uncertain than it was before. Okay, so a way to make the labor market more flexible. And if we look at actually what happened with this reform, indeed, the labor market became more flexible. This is the Employment Protection Labor Index of the OECD. And this is the biggest shock that we observe in the Italian labor market since 2000. And Ichino and Pinotti, they show that with this reform, we have a reduction in the time that it took in court to get the decision of the judge, and it also reduced the layoff costs of for companies.
So can I ask a clarification question? So are you saying that for the firms that are larger than 15 employees,
it's easier to fire people?
It was even easier than the smaller firms to fire them? Or is it as easy as the smaller firms? Or is it still more difficult for them to fire, but then less difficult than before?
So there were no, no, they're still more protected than, because there is, for example, restatement with some foregone wages with the reform. So there is a cap to foregone wages.
Yeah.
And if you work in a small firm, there is no cap. And in small firms, it is the employer who chooses. With the Fornero reform, it is the judge who decides.
Okay. So there are still incentives for the firms to keep their employment level less than 15.
Yes, but you know, we have Italy is characterized by a lot of small firms.
Yeah.
So there is this incentive, but you know, 15 is not a huge number. If you think about, you know, firm in manufacturing or the, you know, the normal size of a firm, it just for the middle size enterprise, middle and little, I think that characterize a lot the north of the country. Then they had an incentive to have less. Yes.
It will be interesting to show whether there is a discontinuity right around there.
The donut diff. And our results are robust to that change. I'm going to show you that, you know, we have some limitation in the way the data are collected from the Bank of Italy. So we have the 15, but then we don't have, you know, 13 before that. It's a big interval of the firm size. And it's also self-declared. the circumstance. Yes.
Sorry, just to get the context a little bit, this is just permanent employees. During this period initially, what was going on with non-permanent contracts? Were they flexibilized? Did they increase? Because there was legislation.
Yes, she did. Yes, a lot of things happened with the Fornero reform. She did some. She changed some contract for apprentices, but I don't remember exactly what was happening in the apprentice.
I think the most important thing was that all of the changes, and there were tons, because this reform comes with 60 different changes. Almost none of them were dependent on firm size. So and because this is a different diff around around 15, we can hope that most of those actually wash out because they're in the constant, if you like, regression. Everyone's affected below 15 and above 15.
I'm going to show you that there is only one other part of the reform that uses this 15 discontinuity, which is the contributi to cassa integrazione for the firms that were not contributing to it. But all the other changes of the Legge Fornero, as Andrew said, didn't depend on this discontinuity. Please.
Just wanted to ask if you have the same model like Germany on borrowed labor, where the employees are actually contracted in a different institution and then borrowed to that company for a certain period of time.
You mean outsourcing, cleaning companies?
It's either, I don't know, it's not exactly outsourcing. No. It's like, it's basically trying to match economic cycles that firms become more flexible in terms of their fixed staff, and they have like this kind of, it's a sort of temporary hiring where the whole HR contracting sits in a different institution. So I don't know if they would be counted. You don't have anything. Not Kurzarbeit.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah,
This is a flexible form of employment.
I don't know. Maybe it's just a German thing, but because I was wondering if it exists, they would create another incentive by to have this kind of labor.
I mean, if the company is in a difficult situation and if the economic circumstances are also difficult, the workers can be put into cassa integrazione. They don't have to be laid off, but they can be put in this system where the company also has contributed, and then this is the wage is paid by the national insurance. If the worker is put aside in this cassa integrazione guadagni. So probably that, but
yeah, maybe I can see if I find the English term for it.
okay, no, but if you, I mean, in Luxembourg, it's very easy to find out German speaking people. So if you just write it to me, they all know. I mean, half of our colleagues, they live in Trier or Saarbrücken, so yes. I can ask them. Yeah. And the other half live in France, so or in Belgium as well. Yeah, okay.
Fornero is only permanent workers.
It's only permanent.
It doesn't apply to temporary workers. You have to have a permanent contract.
What we're looking at doesn't apply to because she did something also on apprentices. But
oh yeah, but that's
but
again,
it's
that wasn't firm size.
Yes. Okay. So this reform, as we've been saying, made workers in larger firms more insecure as compared to those that were working in smaller firms. And this is seen in both actual turnover and separation rates. There is this paper by Berton and co-authors that show that. And we use the same diff-in-diff approach of Berton and colleagues. So the reform is our discontinuity, the pre and the post. And then the treatment group is those who work in firms that have more than 15 employees. And the control groups are those that work in firms that have fewer than 15 employees, or less, because nothing happened to them. And we are capturing a rise in the job loss probability. If we move to another data set and we look at the same sample we're using in this data set, all permanent workers with all private sector workers with a permanent contract. On the Italian labor force labor force survey, we find an increase for these workers in 10% of job loss probability. Chico.
Sorry to interrupt. You talk about discontinuity and diff in diff. So do you do a diff in diff or do you do an RD? I mean, is it at the discontinuity or is it everyone in the less than 15 and more than 15?
Different because we don't have the running variable of firm size. We've only got it categorically. So we can't, I think that's something you were saying earlier as well. So we can't look at 14 versus 15 versus 16 firm size. We've got these big blocks.
We don't look at the discontinuity at the cutoff because you see how big our blocks are. This is the way.
5 to 15.
This is how it's collected in the data.
But would there be enough to do at least the 515 versus the 1619 enough?
We
data?
do that. This is what we do with draw.
You know, you can't damned if you do and damned if you don't, because there's measurement error in firm size or purposeful misreporting or choice of firm size, which means that 5 to 15 and 16 to 19 might actually be, you know, there's misclassification.
Yeah, I'm not sure choice, you know, if there was bunching, that's interesting for another paper, but I don't think it compromises what you're doing here, because if there's bunching, they're still subject to that same reform rather than the other, right? It doesn't matter that there is bunching for what you're doing here, I don't think. And the advantage of doing an RD as opposed to a diff in diff is obviously that selection into very small firms or larger firms is not random. And so if you were looking at the ones that are just at the border, you would be looking at the nearest,
Right.
you know, the nearest comparators in some sense. No?
Right, but it is a different depth, so it's you should be washing out most of the main effects of firm size. But I totally take what we totally take what you're saying.
I mean, we're still writing the paper, so we should check.
Okay. I mean, I would have thought if you do, you know, the 0 to 15 and then the 16 and everybody else.
Yeah.
These are hugely different, right? You could do at least a robustness thing looking at the two nearest categories. Maybe you already do that.
We do that with the donut diff in diff. We exclude these people here. Okay. I said already everything on this slide. So the data, the Bank of Italy data, the survey on household income and wealth. This is biannual. It interviews now around 8,000 households, 20,000 individuals. It's representative of the country. And because it's collected by the Bank of Italy, it has very detailed information on consumption and savings. We already discussed how firm size is reported, but only since 2008. Before they had different categories. And it is a cross-sectional data set with a panel component. We're going to use the cross-section of the survey. And this is our regression, the regression that we're going to estimate, okay? So yi is our dependent variable, is either equivalent savings. The results do not change if we look at annual or monthly. The monthly is computed, the Bank of Italy reports annual data. And just for ease of simplicity here, I'm now going to talk about how much more they save in a month. But all variables are standardized, so our regressions parameters do not change. The monthly figure is obtained just by splitting the yearly by 12. Is a bit rough because we know that sometimes people, they earn more than 12 months, and anyway, we're working on that. So yi is equivalent savings. We use as equivalent scale the square root number of household members. We also check the sensitivity to our result if we change the equivalent scale or if we do not use any equivalent scale at all. And the YI is also in other regressions, the amount of euros that is invested in safe or risky assets. Treat is a dummy variable equal to 1 for workers in large firms, 0 for the others. Post is equal to 1 for observation from 2012 onwards. Lambda T, we have a wave fixed effect, and we control for age, age squared, gender, education, marital status, home ownership as a proxy for wealth, monthly wage, occupation, and region fixed effect, and the standard error that clustered at individual level. Now, because the reform took place in the middle of 2012, we're also going to estimate the second type of equation where we distinguish between 2012 and the 2014. We cannot go further than 2014 because the Renzi government changed everything again. So our post period is 2012 and 2014 because then there is the Jobs Act that, it seems that you know everything. It changed again this dismissal law, and the period before the pre-period is that because of the Bank of Italy data, they changed the way they recorded the firm size. We can only use the 28 and 2010 as pre. So the pre is 28 and 2010, the post is 2012 and 2014. What do we expect? We expect alpha 2 to be positive in the saving regression. So insecure workers should save more. And they should save more. We expect them to save more in safe assets. And we also expect the timing to matter. We expect the beta 3 to be greater than beta 2. First, because beta 2 is this period is half because the reform was implemented in July. And also because it may take time to adjust your habits. So we expect this coefficient to be bigger. Our sample is all private sector workers with permanent contract. We look at those that were hired before 2012 to avoid endogenous changes in the sample composition due to strategic hiring choices of the firm. And this is our sample size, 8,476 individuals, and that is the number of observations. Summary statistics, these are equivalent figures in month. So household disposable income equivalent in a month is around 1,800 euros, of which 1,300 is consumed, 500 euros are equivalent euros are saved. 42 is the average age. We have more men in our sample and the majority are married. These are the distribution of our dependent variables, consumption, equivalent consumption, and equivalent savings. You can see that equivalent savings, as we all know, is negative because people have debts, and consumption starts a little bit above 0, and there are long tails. So we're going to look at what happens to our results if we trim the distributions. And this is it. What is the effect on the Fornero reform on savings? Okay. If this is the first equation where we do not distinguish between the two periods, we have just post 2012. Here is if we distinguish between 2012 and 2014, and the variables, everything is standardized. So we should read these results in terms of standard deviations. So the magnitude is that those that are insecure, they save more, they save 10% more of a standard deviation. This is equivalent to 55 equivalent euros a month. And to give you a figure without equivalent euros, this is equivalent to 100 euros for a household that is composed of 2 adults and 1 child. Okay, so the effect of the reform is to increase the saving of this household of a month of 100 euros. And the effect is driven by what happens in 2014, and control variables do not change our estimated coefficient. Now here we are showing you, this is what we saw before on savings. There is no effect of the reform on income. So the increased saving is coming from the reduction in consumption, in equivalent consumption.
Sorry,
Yes.
interrupting for clarification.
No,
This is good. We have cross-section data.
yes,
They are reporting by people about their own firm size.
yes.
And we have no clue whether these people have switched jobs after the reform.
I'm going to show you that the sample composition doesn't, the characteristics of the difference between the characteristics of control and treated before the reform is the same as the one after the reform. So it's not the sample composition doesn't change. This is not driving our results.
And we don't know whether there's a general equilibrium effect, such as like bigger firms start hiring more, thereby reducing some sort of uncertainty in the market.
Well, these are all people hired before 2012. So they're not, I don't know how much anticipation there was. But these are people who were in their job when the Fornero reform was announced.
We
So,
choose,
so we imposed that.
we impose that.
Restriction to avoid strategically hiring people who are less protected.
But uncertainty is about like what you feel about the markets anyway, even if you stay in your job. You know that there are more employment out there after the reform. That reduces your uncertainty.
Right, yeah, but
expectations anyway.
this is a kind of net effect, you're absolutely right. If we believe the Fornero reform sort of cured the Italian labour market, believe it or not, then you care less about losing your job.
That's right.
Because you can just walk into a new one.
Okay.
So this is the net effect of all
Yeah.
of that.
Fair enough. Okay, thank you. Sorry.
It's useful to have a co-author who. Stephen.
Well, I have a sort of related question, because as the periods here is, you've taken for your sample, exactly coincides with the onset of the GFC and this global financial crisis.
Ah, okay.
And then the problem with the southern Mediterranean countries, the what coming,
Yes.
the currency crisis,
Yes.
which is around about this time.
Yeah,
And I'm trying to think how this affects what's going on in terms of who who actually has a job over the different years of the sample. So it's sort of related to the sample composition question. But because you're pooling your data rather than using a longitudinal sample,
yeah,
I'm not clear, but you know, an off the hip and probably wrong remark might be to ask, so they save more. Is that because with recovery there are now more people in a job, so they're actually able to save more?
I show you that only those
That's
that are able,
something like
because
that.
those that have an income below the median, they don't. There is a zero effect for them.
Yeah.
It's only those that are have an
In the
income above
comfort
the
zone.
median, those that do not have children.
Do we know what happened to the employment rates in Italy in these countries?
We know, but I
that's
don't
what-
remember.
That's what we should look at.
And within the sample, I mean, that's
Within
that's-
that sample.
that as well.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I'm still not clear. I mean, you're pooling the
Yes.
data.
Well, we have to.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
most of it.
That's the way you do it. And you're not taking it.
No, we don't look
any
at the
longitudinal
panel.
stuff.
It's a tiny
Yeah, I know,
panel,
it's
so
too
you
small.
know, it's too small to do anything sensible. But what we could do, actually, if there probably was a fall in the employment rate, you could actually calibrate what the differential saving would have to be of the people who, you know, are no longer there to try to back out, and I suspect it wouldn't work. But, you know, I'm saying that because that's what I hope, not because I know.
No,
But it's just, on top of employment falling, you have more positive selection into employment.
yeah,
So
exactly.
the people who remain
Yeah,
employed are different.
Yeah, but that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
What would the people who we no longer observe
Yeah.
have to look like in order for this to be a pure selection?
So following on that,
Yes.
here you're looking only at people who stayed in employment until 2014, right?
No, we look at
That's
people that were
cross-section.
hired, it's a cross-section.
Cross sections.
Everybody, we just look at those that were hired before the reform.
So the people in the 2014 treatment may be different from the people in the.
Yes, because we look at the
Yeah.
cross section, but I'm going to show you here that actually the difference between the two, before and after, is never significant. The only difference is a little bit in the age, but we control for age.
Right, but then I understand their concern now, right, is that these people could be selected on something you're not having.
not looking at.
You're not observing, such as grit.
Education.
Which would have to be orthogonal
To these
one
things.
of those things that we can measure. But yeah, of course, it's, you know, you can never prove it because it's
I
uncertain.
was just trying to understand why they were concerned about selection, and now I see.
Yeah, because we use the cross-section.
So, but still, these people are the ones that are currently employed.
Exactly.
Yes,
Of reform.
pre,
So, you know, they are hard pre-reform,
yes.
but they remain employed, as Chico says.
That's the
You don't know
selection.
that. They don't know that because
So employment status on a current wave can be unemployed, but they were hired in their previous jobs before the reform. Is that?
the only condition for sample selection, I understand, is had a job in 2012. Or right, sorry, whenever, 2012.
Had a job when observed
Oh, yeah, had a job when observed
Had a job when
and
observed.
the 2012.
and hired pre-2012. Yeah.
What happened in some other way? Who knows?
I mean, there could have been people who had a job in 2010. Anyway, you see, we're the same thing. Yeah.
All right, I hate to act as chair, but let's give you a chance to.
Finished long ago, so it's good to start. So we can see what to do with it and get suggestions, but I told you the slide was showing you the usual parallel trend assumption. This is just on the raw data. This is the difference between the treated. We always get confused here. This is consumption and this is savings. And the savings of, so this is the treated, this is the control. And so we see that they start to diverge in 2012. And in 2014, they diverged, they are parallel before. And this is another way to check the parallel trend assumption. I'm plotting here the difference between the coefficient of a regression of savings and consumption between treating and control group when we control for our control variables, taking 2008 difference as the reference. And we see that the difference is not significant. In 2010, the reference is 2008. Then it starts to diverge in 2012, and then very significant diverges in 2014, which is what we showed before in that regression. Okay, now, as we said already, the Fornero reform changed, the legge Fornero changed a lot of things, but the only other change that had to do with 15 employees only was the contribution to Cassa Integrazione. Okay, now, as we mentioned already, Cassa Integrazione is the system that gets in when to avoid the company to lay off workers, okay? And the Fornero reform, they imposed that the companies that didn't have contribution to Cassa Integrazione were starting to contribute to Cassa Integrazione. So in theory, this could be perceived as a protection of the workers because the Cassa Integrazione was starting to be there also for those who were not covered. And in practice, Chicchi and Leonardi, they show that only the transport and the banking sector, they complied by the end of 2014 with this requirement if the company had more than 15 workers to start contributing to Cassa Integrazione. So we get similar results when you exclude these two sectors. A lot of other changes, as I also said, that the other changes, they do not have this kind of 15 cutoff that we need. Okay, so what happens in the robustness checks when we use another equivalence scale, we use no equivalence scale. Instead of running the regression on level, we look at hyperbolic sign, the transformation because of the negative numbers, blah, blah. Steven knows everything about it. What happens if we trim the top and the bottom because of the long tails? And what happens if we do the donut diff in diff? So this is our result. This is the baseline. This is OECD equivalence scale, no equivalence scale, IHS, trim, and the donut diff in diff. Okay, so I hope that we convinced you that the results are pretty stable, okay, to the robustness check. But then who, okay?
Go back to that one.
You're not convinced?
I know, I was just looking obviously at the one without stars, which is.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
That's.
Because
that's the
it's,
donut.
we have too few,
Hmm?
we don't have a lot of observation.
Hmm.
This is the donut. Because of the size is gonna be 0, 4, we have to drop a huge chunk in the middle. Because of
So
the way
you're
they
dropping
did
in
that.
the middle, yeah, which is the opposite of what
But what you had in mind.
what I had in
looking at
mind with
the-
DRD. But I mean, so long as the parallel trends are there, then Andrew's answer, which is, you know, it should drop out because the difference in difference is okay, I
You
guess.
convinced?
Well, yes.
Good, thank you.
That's very, thank you, Chico, it's very.
I'm not sure Stephen is convinced yet.
Very
I
positive.
had a different one. I wondered whether or not you might major on column 3 rather than the one that you did before. I mean, you started off talking about behavioral response when you were motivating the talk.
Yes,
And I thought households' behavioral responses are in terms of the euros,
package,
actual euros,
yes.
and all household composition differences are right-hand side variables rather than left-hand side variables.
So you think we should have these, our main specification?
I
and
would
then-
go so far as to say,
Yeah.
because I don't know, I just put it out there, that
Yeah.
was my reaction.
And then just control for household size.
And what,
Yeah.
well, and composition.
Yes, and composition. Yeah, thank you. Okay, now heterogeneity results, no difference if we interact with female above median age, risk aversion, not partnered. We have a 0 effect if there are, this is the savings regression, if there are children in the household, and if the household is actually constrained, they have an income which is below the median household income. And this is what happens to consumption. This coefficient here is almost significant. It becomes significant here in the consumption equation, and they behave as the other side of the medal with respect to the saving. Those with children in the household, there is 0 effect for them. Okay, so 0 treatment effect for single, for parents, and for those that have an income below. They have sort of below the median. And we look at other sources of heterogeneity, and we don't find any significant results in terms of region of residence, occupation, education, level of wealth. Chico.
So everything is driven by relatively high income couples without children. If you drop out single and parents.
The single and the parents.
Yeah, pretty
It's
much.
a linked story.
People who can save more
Yeah.
in 2010.
Dinky is,
Yes.
your paper is,
Above,
Dinky is,
no, this is median. The median is pretty low in Italy, yeah, they're not
but
very
Dinky is
rich.
double income no kids, so Dinky's move,
Might be inkies.
Dinky's start saving a little bit.
Dinky start,
After this,
yes.
okay.
Sinky.
Okay. We should change the name of the folder.
Dinky saving, that's what.
Dinky saving,
Dinky
okay.
saving.
They drive me nuts, my co-author. They have all this, the folder with letters, and I never know what's in there. Yes, please.
Why did you change the title to portfolio choice?
Because, wait, it's coming. It looked nicer.
Okay.
But we can go back to consumption, okay? So consumption, to the expenditure, the Bank of Italy, we allow us to look at this type of consumption, categorize food, other non-durable means and other durable, and here it is. This is food, other non-durable, and the two durable consumption, okay? So there is no change, significant change in food. Okay, and this was something that was asked before.
Yeah.
We categorize ourselves because they have 30 different categories in the Bank of Italy data about the type of assets that the household own. Okay, so we group them into safe and risky, following this undefined risky and safe category, and we find that there is a reduction in the investment in risky assets and an increase in those in safe. And we thought that this was probably more new than what happened to consumption. That's why we changed the title. And it's something that is really unique about the Bank of Italy data, that the other survey do not allow you such a detailed analysis of the type of investment.
And have you done the same heterogeneity analysis here? According to single.
Did we? So we should probably.
You
Yes.
should.
Yeah.
Do this.
Yes. Yes.
Going back to Cecilia's earlier point,
Mm.
even if you use data from other sources to suggest that there is a loss in return here, a loss in
Yes.
expected return because of the risk-return trade-off, then that is in some sense one measurable cost of economic insecurity
Yeah.
to these households.
But even the reduction in consumption is a cost. Because this means that it can lead to the recession. You know, you consume less because you worry. And then.
Less clear to me that it is huh?
That's less clear.
It is less clear because you could, just be deferring consumption. So from an individual point of view, it's
True.
not obvious.
True.
But a loss in returns would be.
It happens and that's it. It's
And I'm
not-
not even sure that you need, Cecilia may have higher standards, but even if you just gave me the data from, some other database that says, look, this is the average returns on these assets and on these assets over the last 10 years. I'd be like, okay.
You would
I
be-
think that would be convincing
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
claim there's a lot. Because you can reproduce the portfolio. You
Yes,
have
we
the
can, we have, there,
shares in each type of
Yes.
asset.
we do,
Yeah.
we do.
And sorry, one more little point.
Please.
On the heterogeneity thing.
Mm.
I'm just obsessing about this firm size. Could you also look at, in a sense, you're already getting at it with the median income here. But I wonder, for example, whether everything is driven by people in really large firms. You see what I mean?
See. See.
Because they're quite different, right? So I had been obsessing about the RD, forget the RD, let's say we all buy but is it all driven by people in large firms or not?
Yeah,
Or is it really
yes.
their income?
Yes,
I don't know if that's interesting.
Yeah. You know what happens with our paper, they get,
Yes.
the end gets a book, so it's good to check and to. Well, I basically am done. This is the end, so thank you. This is just a summary of what we just said. Shiko, you want to read? I suggest.
Thank you, Conchita.
Oh, thank
So
you for.
We have time for questions and we have to see whether there are any online. Not yet, so
Thanks for all the suggestions.
it's not as though we haven't asked any questions yet.
Absolutely.
But let me sit here and see if other people have questions.
Absolutely, you ask a lot of.
Some of the people who are not used to the way economists behave are
Yeah.
really shocked with us because they don't, they.
Okay,
I know you do. Stephen,
I'm just wondering, so you said Renzi changed everything.
yes, someone else is writing a paper on
I was
it.
just going to ask, because is it because it's unclear what the effects were on job insecurity, or because, well,
We
you just
just-
told me a reason.
Yeah, we were just in Bordeaux and we met some colleagues from Napoli working at the effect of the Renzi reform on insecurity. So they are looking at that. And I also told them to look at fertility choices because fertility, using the panel,
It'd be quite hard to pick up eventually, wouldn't it?
Because we don't have.
Oh,
True. Yeah, I'm one of them, so.
That's it.
Yeah, I mean, this is another paper, but of course, Italy in this period is well known for young adults staying at home, even though they're working. So would the data allow you to check whether these young adults become less likely to leave home in the face of insecurity?
We can check. We can check. And we haven't,
Not in this stage, we can't.
Surely it should.
there is a small mental dimension.
Same with the parents.
Or just.
You know how old they are and if they work.
Age of everybody.
You do.
Do you have a household roster?
A household?
Roster,
What is
the
a-
list of everyone who lives in a house.
Of course. You know everything.
Yeah, you know.
Of course you do.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, you know what everybody's doing. If they have a job and you know everything about household members. See?
Because it could be interesting. To see if it affected those dynamics.
Absolutely. And the group is not, the Renzi group is not looking at that. So maybe we need to do two reforms. The Fornero.
There's the question of investment in housing as well,
Yeah.
because we're looking at, I don't think housing is one of the 32.
No, but Italy
There's
is,
savings accounts.
you get the house from your parents. It's another country. Your parents and your
Sure, it's not
grandparents.
mine.
Your parents and your you don't earn enough to buy a home anyway, so it's your parents and grandparents that.
That's increasingly the case in the UK too, except here they don't give anybody the houses, so.
Okay.
Did doubling up rates change at all over this period? Did doubling up rates, the prevalence of people staying at home with their
I
kids
don't
or
know.
moving back to their parents?
So that's what we.
I don't know.
So you can also have
Presumably.
I don't know if it did.
or go down with the
Yeah.
PFC is.
Verify?
So I just finished a paper using the same data, and looking at fertility, but
With the same.
with the same
period.
data, with the Bank of Fertility data on covering those years, but it wasn't that. And now we know that my paper was about self-employment, and we look at about like 20% around those years of all employed were self-employed. And I wonder about the firm size distribution, what Chico has been mentioning. My recollection is it's a very skewed distribution. Median firm size was about like 7 people. So you had a lot, like even in the non-self-employed group, you have a lot of people living in, like working in small firms.
Yeah,
And very few large firms.
yeah.
But you're talking about medium firm size, you're not talking about the medium worker.
No,
The median worker will probably be in a large firm. Because big firms have more employees. But I understand.
Well, are you
More small firms, especially.
Yeah,
in
they
Italy.
don't employ many people, so it's,
I mean, in France, there's more employment in small firms than in large firms.
define large.
Over 50.
Define more.
no, I think it will be nice to have a
Yes.
graph showing the distribution of firm size reported
Yes.
by respondents coming from the
Yes,
survey.
yes.
Yes, I
Yes.
very much agree.
Yes. Yes.
Anybody else?
Yes.
I have one almost like, well, maybe sillier than my usual, but which is, you had these measures,
Yeah,
as you showed in the beginning
Yes.
of economic
yes.
insecurity. Not for this paper, but would it be interesting to check whether the people who are responding here are the ones that have,
Cheap.
greater economic insecurity in your measures? It could be that it's not at all, or it could be that actually more vulnerable, poorer people may record, I'm just guessing, higher measures of insecurity depending on your definition, but are not able to respond.
See,
Or it could also be that no, actually, the more economic insecurity by the Bossert Ambrosio measure, the more they respond, which would be interesting.
yeah, we could using the pan, yes. Yeah, we can. And we have also the possibility here, looking at wealth. Because this survey likes wealth whenever it's there. Yes. Yes.
Valentina.
Just related to that, I wonder if there is any winners from this reform. Like there are supposed to be people who are less affected by this economic insecurity, right? Because you have high wealth and you are married. And shouldn't there be a group that benefits from this flexible market and ends up consuming more and investing in more risky assets? And if not, so why not?
We're estimating the gaps. You know, it may be that everyone got better off in some,
Yeah, but-
whatever your criterion is. But there's a gap in how much people got better off. We're really talking about.
Yeah, but I wonder if there is a group that benefits and if you see in
Well, with this analysis, no, by definition, because it's in a sense the difference between the two groups. But yeah, I mean, that's in terms of welfare, since we've got to have a section.
And you know, generally what you hear is that the gains will come in the future. They're not immediate. You know, it might be painful, but then that's why they, you know, at least that is what I hope. That's why Monty, I hope he knew what he was doing for the others.
But maybe employment went up. I mean, maybe that was the thing that happened. Actually, the future employment prospects went up. But some group, I don't know if we know that. It's very hard to show that was the result of this reform. Some choices.
But it has consequences about how you interpret your parameter as truly increase in job insecurity or just the net effect of the reform, whatever that is.
Oh, it's the net effect, whatever that was, because we can't met. I mean, this is like a reduced form.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So we haven't got all the mechanisms. But yeah, no, I wrote that down.
Yeah. Sure.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for Conchita.